I'm the type of gamer, I buy all the consoles, I own all the platforms. I own a PS5, I own an Xbox Series X and S, I own a Switch. I like to game. I like to collect games, I like to play video games. I like there to be things that if, one might be exclusive to one platform, it's not exclusive against me, right? So that's the way I kind of live. But also, I'm like the rest of you, or most of you, where prefer to play on one platform versus multiple. Like, I like to spend most of my time gaming on Xbox. I will play the PS5 for the Sony first-party exclusive stuff. When it comes to third-party stuff, we're supposed to be getting more and more out of the old-school thinking of third-party exclusives happening. It used to be a big thing back in the Xbox 360 era. Even stuff like Gears of War was a third-party exclusive for Xbox, and we used to see that more prevalently back then. Nowadays, it doesn't make sense to do that because it's so easy to kind of create games for both platforms at the same time. So imagine my shock when you're looking and you're seeing, okay, well, these games are scheduled to come out here, here, and here, and then you look and you see, oh, well, they're coming out on everything but Xbox, right? Is there, like, the sabotage is real? Is it really Sony going out there strong-arming the competition? Because that's happened. Listen, that's not new to the industry. If you might know anything about the history of video games, you'll know that Nintendo kind of strong-armed developers a long time ago not to put games on the old Sega Master System, right? And then they also had the Nintendo seal of approval. It was this whole deal where you could only get approved for a certain amount of games per year on Nintendo. And the reason why they did that was to make sure that there was quality games so that they didn't go through the situation like the market crash with the Atari. What happened with Atari was a lot of people blame ET or whatever. I mean, that was one of the reasons, but the real reason was just lack of quality games. Like, anybody could make a game for Atari and put it out. So there were good games on Atari, and there wasn't a real way of knowing if they were good games, because it wasn't like it is now where you can see on the internet or magazines or whatever. Like, you go into a store for your kids to buy Atari games, and you can buy the really good Atari game for $40, or 5 Atari games for $40, and a lot of people were buying the 5 Atari games for $40 that were just garbage games. So I'll give you a little history lesson there. But then later on, Nintendo would strong arm some of the developers, like, hey, if you put your stuff on Sega, we're not going to let you put it on Nintendo. And that's sort of basically what happened there. Sega was forced to sort of do their own thing, and they managed to do quite well considering they were getting actively sabotaged across the board there. Now, I'm sitting here looking at this and I'm like, okay, and this isn't a new announcement, by the way. This is kind of known. I was just looking at some of the games that I saw release dates for, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll pick that up on Xbox. So Baldur's Gate 3 is releasing this August, and it's apparently had a long time of early access on PC, and it finally releases in full later this year. The game will also be arriving on only PlayStation 5, allowing players on the console to take on new adventures with or without a friend. So again, it's kind of an interesting CRPG, and I have some familiarity with it, but it's like, it's not coming to Xbox. And apparently, doing a little bit more digging, they were having issues with something, possibly even the Xbox Series S. So you sort of just scratch your head a little bit and you're like, this kind of sucks. It's like, here's another game. And there's also been other games, even though some of them are smaller than others, like the Inspector Gadget game, or, there was also that other game that's coming to you from the Netflix developer. Yeah, that's one. And like, you just kind of left scratching your head, like, why is Xbox kind of getting left out of the loop here? And it's really unfortunate, and it's something that I'm not really a fan of, seeing Microsoft and Xbox get left out, because it leads to a lot of people thinking that, Microsoft can't. I mean, listen, like, Microsoft can't compete, or that people hate Microsoft, or they don't see it as a viable thing, because you see this happen all the time, right? You just do. I mean, even smaller stuff. I mean, we all know Square seems to be very anti-Xbox right now, but even stuff like the Silent Hill remake or Silent Hill 2 remake, it's not coming to Xbox, right? Like, what is the reasoning behind that? Like, honestly, I'd love to know what the reasoning is behind Xbox not getting that. You're trying to relaunch a brand, right, in Silent Hill, but you leave out Xbox. How does that make sense? And even back to to this, which I already knew this from a while ago, there was sort of a recent response to the FTC lawsuit against Microsoft, seeming to suggest that Silent Hill 2 isn't going to be launched on Xbox, and it's just one of those things where we see people kind of react differently to this stuff. Like, it doesn't make sense. The whole point of relaunching the game or whatever just goes to show that, you know, hey, these games for some reason aren't really going to Xbox, and it's really unfortunate because, you know, I know a lot of people go, well, Microsoft could do the same thing. They could get exclusivity, and they have in the past, right? Rise of the Tomb Raider, I'm sure a lot of us remember that. The big problem with Rise of the Tomb Raider was the amount of backlash that they got, right? There's an uneven, disproportionate amount of bias, and the treatment Microsoft gets versus Sony is completely different now. So Sony can get a big game like Final Fantasy and make that exclusive and keep it off of Xbox, and nobody would bat an eye. Hell, Sony could get Resident Evil and make that exclusive, and nobody would bat an eye. Right? Metal Gear, whatever they could make, and nobody bats an eye. If Microsoft were to go out and get an exclusive Sonic the Hedgehog game, or an exclusive Metal Gear game, or an exclusive Final Fantasy game, what do you think people would do? They would flip out. They would absolutely lose their minds and flip out. So that's what they did back then with Rise of the Tomb Raider. And you know how I know that there's a bias there and a double standard? Because Sony got Street Fighter and nobody said anything about it, right? Like, begrudgingly, I think a couple people were like, yeah, that sucks. But nobody was going on and on and on about it the way that they were with, you know, Sony doing it. You know, Microsoft apparently has a complete different double standard that they have to abide by. So the fact that there's so many of these third-party exclusives in a time when there shouldn't be, and I have to believe that, I mean, is Sony paying for all of these? I mean, or just developers not utilizing Xbox or not going to Xbox, or they don't view it as a viable source? That is a big question going forward, and Microsoft has to really kind of answer that before too long, to be honest with you. Like, they really do. They have to go out there and get some answers out there. I feel like this is something that they can't afford to just kind of rest around on. And guess what? Just because they have a bunch of money doesn't mean that they can go out and do that again. Some developers might not want the money. And that's just a sad fact. I mean, you can see developers that maybe it's more prestigious to them to sell a certain amount of copies versus not sell that many copies and maybe even make more money. But also the threat of not being able to put their games on future PlayStation consoles is a very big threat as well, because PlayStation has a stranglehold on the industry, which is very unfortunate. But again, you know, I mean, listen, we've seen that Nintendo was able to be successful doing their own thing. I think Microsoft, if they ever get to the point where they actually want to be, could be successful as well. Talking about players, talking about subscribers, talking about putting out great games. I'm certainly not talking about the idea of selling more plastic boxes, because again, if Microsoft really wanted to sell plastic boxes, they wouldn't put all their stuff on cloud and PC, and that would be a way to push sales, right? Like, obviously, if Sony did day and date games, they probably wouldn't push as many plastic boxes either, which is why they don't. You know, people don't want to wait around for a great game, and I think that that's something that Microsoft knows, and they've admitted to that as much before. So with that being said, let me know what you guys think. How do you feel about Xbox missing out on games? What game that they're missing out on do you most envy, right? Is it Final Fantasy 16, 7 remakes? Is it, you know, Baldur's Gate? Is it Silent Hill 2? Is it anything from Square Enix? Let me know. Thanks for watching. I'm the Crap Gamer. This is Crap Gamer Reviews. Rack 'em up.